Imagine you're just grilling some BBQ, and suddenly, alarms start blaring, aliens start collapsing, and you're accused of launching a chemical attack. Could mere spices really spark an intergalactic crisis? Listen to this story and decide. For yourself, Chef Marco Santori wiped beads of sweat from his brow as he meticulously arranged his cooking station aboard the Galactic Alliance's flagship diplomatic vessel, the Concordia. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of burns and knife nicks, moved with practiced precision as he unpacked ingredients that had traveled across 17 star systems to reach him. First human, invited to the intergalactic cultural exchange. And they send a chef, he muttered to himself with a mixture of pride and nervousness. No pressure, Marco. Just don't poison anyone. The cavernous exhibition hall of the Concordia buzzed with activity as representatives from over 40 sentient species prepared their cultural displays. The air shimmered with holographic presentations and strange music that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the bones. Floating translation drones hovered everywhere, converting the cacophony of alien languages into something approaching comprehensible speech. Ambassador Elena Reeves approached Marco's station, her formal diplomatic attire contrasting sharply with his white chef's coat. Remember, Chef Santori, this isn't just about food. This is humanity's first major cultural showcase since joining the Galactic Alliance 3 standard cycles ago. The Alliance's High Council will be watching. Marco nodded, his expression serious. I understand, Ambassador. Don't worry, food is a universal language. Not exactly, Reeves replied, lowering her voice. Most species in the Alliance consume nutrient solutions or photosynthesize. The concept of cooking is unusual. The Galactic Security Bureau approved your demonstration, but keep it mild. No unnecessary theatrics. Marco raised an eyebrow. They approved my ingredient list, right? The rosemary, the chili, the garlic. Yes, Reeves waved dismissively. The xenobiologists cleared everything. Just be careful with the heat and smoke. Some species have extraordinarily sensitive respiratory systems. As the ambassador walked away, Marco returned to his preparations, carefully organizing his mise en place. The theme of the exchange was cultural fundamentals, showcasing the core elements that defined each civilization. For humanity, Marco had decided to demonstrate one of the most primal cooking techniques, fire. Specifically, barbecue, slow-cooked, spice-rubbed ribs that represented thousands of years of human culinary evolution. Across the hall, Marco spotted the Zalthari delegation setting up what appeared to be a tank of luminescent gas. The methane-breathing crystalline beings communicated through color patterns that rippled across their translucent bodies. Next to them, representatives of the Vecran consulate were arranging what looked like mathematical formulas in three-dimensional space, their form of poetry. Captain Darian Hayes, head of the human security detail, approached Marco's station with a handheld scanner. His muscular frame and alert eyes suggested a military background that predated his diplomatic security assignment. Final safety check, Chef, he said, running the device over Marco's equipment. Standard procedure for all presenters. Anything I should be worried about? Marco asked, gesturing to his portable grill. Hayes shrugged. Just follow protocol. Most species here have never seen an open flame outside of a weapons discharge or industrial accident. You've been cleared to demonstrate, but keep it controlled. The, scanner beeped as it passed over Marco's spice container. Capsaicin, Hayes noted, checking his device. Cleared for demonstration purposes only. He pointed to a red button beneath Marco's station. Emergency ventilation control. Hit that if there's any problem with smoke or fumes. Got it, Marco said, though he couldn't help thinking the precautions seemed excessive for a simple cooking demonstration. As Hayes moved on, Marco noticed a tall, slender alien observing him from a distance. Unlike the other delegates mingling throughout the hall, this one stood perfectly still, its 4 eyes blinking in an unsettling pattern. Marco recognized the species from his pre-mission briefings, a Sci-Fi observer known for their absolute dedication to security protocols and risk assessment. The station's intercom chimed, and a melodic voice announced the commencement of the cultural presentations. In 15 minutes, Marco took a deep breath and began his final preparations, setting out his marinated ribs and checking the temperature on his specially designed compact grill. The unit had been modified to contain most of the smoke while still providing the authentic flavor that only came from real fire. "You are the human food manipulator." Marco startled at the voice beside him. A Vecran diplomat had approached silently. The being's translucent skin revealed a complex network of pulsing purple veins, and its three pupilled eyes regarded Marco with what might have been curiosity. "Chef," Marco corrected with a smile. "I'm a chef." "We have studied your species' historical records," the Vecran continued, its voice a soft whistle. "Your kind applies thermal extremes and chemical compounds to organic matter before consumption. Fascinating and primitive." Before Marco could respond, the Vecran leaned closer to inspect his ingredients. "These substances," it gestured at his spice rub, "they are irritants, are they not? Yet you intentionally apply them to your sustenance. We call it flavor," Marco explained, offering the Vecran a small container of his spice blend to examine. "It stimulates our taste receptors in pleasurable ways." The Vecran's skin rippled with what Marco interpreted as discomfort. "Voluntary chemical irritation for pleasure. Truly, humans are unlike any species in the Alliance." It handed back the spice container and drifted away, its movement almost ghost-like. At precisely 1300 GST, the exhibition officially began. Various delegations activated their cultural displays. Drask warriors demonstrated ceremonial combat forms, moving with frightening speed despite their hulking frames. Tellurian mind singers broadcast empathic harmonies that left listeners feeling strangely nostalgic for places they'd never been. And the Zalthari released controlled bursts of their bioluminescent communication spores, creating ephemeral patterns of breathtaking beauty in the air. At 1307 GST, it was Earth's turn. Marco activated his grill, and the exhibition hall filled, with the distinctive sizzle of meat hitting hot metal. A thin wisp of fragrant smoke rose from the cooking surface as he laid down the seasoned ribs. The reaction was immediate and unexpected. Several nearby aliens recoiled, their bodies contorting in what appeared to be distress. The Sci-Fi observer's skin flushed from its normal gray to an alarming orange. 3 Zalthari delegates began to vibrate rapidly, their crystalline forms emitting high-pitched frequencies that hurt human ears. "What's happening?" Marco asked, looking around in confusion. The ribs had barely begun to cook. Then the alarms began to sound. Not the gentle chimes used for scheduling, but piercing, warbling alerts that Marco recognized from safety drills. Red emergency lights pulsed throughout the exhibition hall. Biological. Contamination detected. Security lockdown initiated. All personnel remain in place. Ambassador Reeves rushed toward Marco's station, her face pale. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Nothing," Marco protested, gesturing to his grill. "I just started cooking." Captain Hayes appeared beside them, his hand on his sidearm, expression grim. "The station's biosensors have detected airborne toxins originating from this location. The Zalthari delegates are experiencing respiratory collapse." Marco looked across the hall in horror. The crystalline beings had indeed fallen to the floor, their normally brilliant bodies now dull and motionless. Nearby, a Vecran diplomat was convulsing, purple fluid leaking from its eyes. "That's impossible," Marco insisted. "It's just barbecue. The ingredients were all approved." Director Varen Kask of the Galactic Alliance Security Bureau observed the human chef through the one-way quantum glass of the detention cell. The human sat perfectly still at the metal table, his white cooking uniform now wrinkled and stained. "Fascinating," Kask said, his four-fingered hand adjusting the sensitivity of his olfactory filters. "Even after decontamination, the human skin still emits trace amounts of those compounds." Commander Lex Terral, representing the human diplomatic security team, stood beside Kask with undisguised frustration. "Director, we've been here for 3 hours. The chemical analysis is complete. Those aren't biological weapons. They're cooking. Ingredients. Every item was pre-approved by your own xenobiologists." Kask turned to face Toril, his elongated head tilting slightly. The Xeran administrator's species was known for their methodical approach to security. Some would say obsessively. "So, Commander, 7 delegates are still in medical stasis. The Vecran representative may suffer permanent sensory damage. And you expect me to accept that this was merely food preparation?" "That's exactly what I expect you to accept because—" "That's the truth," Toril replied firmly. "Humans cook their food. We apply heat and seasonings. It's a cultural practice dating back thousands of years." Kask made a sound that might have been a scoff. "A practice that, coincidentally, produces compounds that are neurotoxic to 37% of Alliance species." In the adjacent briefing room, Ambassador Reeves faced the Emergency Response Committee of the Galactic Alliance, a hastily assembled group of 7 representatives from the major political blocs. The atmosphere was tense, with the Zalthari representative's holographic projection flickering with agitation. "The evidence suggests premeditation." The crystalline being's translated voice resonated through the chamber. "The human brought equipment, specifically designed to aerosolize these compounds." "It's a grill," Reeves countered, struggling to maintain her diplomatic composure. "A cooking apparatus. And may I remind the committee that every component of the demonstration was submitted for review and received official clearance." The Vecran representative, a substitute for the injured diplomat, rippled with distress. "A procedural failure we are investigating. Our preliminary assessment indicates that your submission listed these compounds in their inert state. No one anticipated they would be deliberately volatilized." "Because no one bothered to research basic human cultural practices," Reeves snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. "I apologize for my outburst, but this misunderstanding could have been avoided with even the most cursory study of human cuisine." In yet another section of the Concordia, Captain Hayes had gathered with the remaining human delegation in their assigned quarters. The mood was somber as they watched the Galactic News Network's coverage of what was now being called the Terran Incident. "Remains in containment as Alliance specialists assess the long-term environmental impact of the released compounds," the non-humanoid announcer was saying, while footage showed decontamination teams in the exhibition hall. "The Zephyri Council has already issued a formal protest, demanding that Earth's provisional membership in the Alliance be suspended pending a full investigation." "They can't be serious," Dr. Ilara Singh, the delegation's xenobiologist, said in disbelief. "This is a cultural misunderstanding, not an attack." Hayes switched off the projection. "It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is what they perceive it to be." He turned to face the team of 12 humans who represented Earth in this disastrous first major cultural exchange. "We need to get ahead of this, or humanity's standing in the Alliance could be set back decades." "What do you suggest?" asked Professor Thomas Rodriguez, a cultural anthropologist. "The Alliance Security Bureau has quarantined all our culinary equipment and ingredients. Half the delegates are calling for Marco's prosecution under the Biological Weapons Convention." Reeves's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing the stress beneath. "Now we try to salvage humanity's reputation before the Alliance votes on whether to classify human cooking as a biohazardous activity." Marco stared at her in disbelief. "They can't be serious." "Oh, they're deadly serious," Reeves replied grimly. "The committee meeting is scheduled for 08 GAR GST tomorrow. We have less than 18 hours to convince them that our cuisine isn't a form of chemical warfare." The human delegation gathered in their private conference room aboard the Concordia, the atmosphere heavy with tension. Ambassador Reeves stood at the head of the table, facing the 12 specialists who represented humanity's first major cultural delegation to the Galactic Alliance. "The situation is worse than we initially thought," she began without preamble. The Zephyri and Vecran representatives are pushing for Earth to be placed under culinary sanctions. They're arguing that human cooking techniques represent an unacceptable risk in shared environments. That's absurd, Dr. Singh protested. We can't change thousands of years of cultural practices because other species find them offensive. It's not just offensive. It's physically harmful to them, Captain Hayes pointed out. We need to acknowledge that fact while finding a way forward. Marco sat silently at the far end of the table, still processing the events of the day. His simple cooking demonstration had somehow escalated into a full-blown diplomatic crisis that threatened humanity's standing in the galactic community. What exactly are they proposing? Professor Rodriguez asked. Reeves activated a holographic display showing the draft resolution. Classification of all human cuisine involving thermal processing or aromatic compounds as Level 3 controlled substances. Mandatory chemical breakdowns for all Earth food exports. Restriction of human cooking to specially designated and ventilated areas in shared spaces. They want to regulate how we eat? Marco finally spoke, his chef's pride wounded. Food isn't just nutrition for humans. It's art, history, culture. It's how we connect with each other. The Alliance doesn't see it that way, Reeves replied. To many species, our cooking methods are equivalent to deploying chemical irritants in public spaces. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had joined the Galactic Alliance just 3 standard cycles ago, after first contact with Vecran explorers in the Kuiper Belt. Earth was still adjusting to its place in the vast interstellar community, a minor player with limited influence, desperate to make a good impression. So what's our strategy? Hayes asked, always the pragmatist. Reeves looked around the table. We need to reframe this narrative. Instead of defending ourselves, we need to demonstrate the value of human cuisine, not just to us, but potentially to the Alliance. How do we do that when our food literally poisons them? Marco asked. Dr. Singh leaned forward, her scientific mind racing. Not all species reacted negatively. The Drask representatives seemed intrigued by the spice demonstration before security shut it down. The Drask? Hayes raised an eyebrow. The warrior species. They're methane breathers with highly developed chemoreceptors, Singh confirmed. According to my research, they use chemical signals for everything from marking territory to expressing emotions. They might actually appreciate the complexity of human flavors. A thoughtful silence fell over the room as the implications of this revelation took hold. Are you suggesting we try to form an alliance with the Drask Marauders? Reeves asked cautiously. The Drask were respected in the Alliance for their military prowess, but were notoriously difficult diplomatic partners, preferred isolation, and rarely engaged in cultural exchanges. Not an alliance, Marco said, an idea beginning to form. A demonstration. A controlled one, with proper safety protocols, for species that might actually appreciate what human cuisine represents. Hayes nodded slowly. A counter-narrative. Instead of human cooking being seen as a hazard, we position it as a unique cultural practice that, while not for everyone, has value to certain Alliance members. It's risky, Reeves warned. If anything goes wrong, we'll only reinforce the perception that humans are dangerous. More dangerous than being classified as a species that produces toxic emissions as part of our daily life? Rodriguez challenged. We need to take control of this story before the Alliance does it for us. For the next several hours, the human delegation crafted their response to the crisis. Dr. Singh worked with Marco to analyze which elements of human cuisine might be appreciated by which Alliance species. Hayes coordinated with security to ensure any demonstration would meet the strictest safety protocols. Rodriguez prepared cultural context materials to help translate the significance of cooking in human development. Meanwhile, outside their conference room, the diplomatic fallout continued to spread across the Concordia. Galactic news networks broadcast continuous updates on the Terran incident, with experts speculating on the broader implications for interspecies relations. Some commentators questioned whether Earth had been admitted to the alliance prematurely, while others suggested this cultural clash revealed more fundamental incompatibilities between humans and the galactic community. By 22 May GST, Ambassador Reeves secured a preliminary hearing with a subset of the Emergency Committee, specifically representatives from species that might be more receptive to human perspectives. The Drask had agreed to attend, along with representatives from the Tellurian Collective and, surprisingly, a junior diplomat from the Zalthari consulate, whose curiosity apparently outweighed the official position of outrage. Remember, Reeves cautioned the team as they made final preparations, this isn't just about defending human cuisine. It's about demonstrating that what makes us different doesn't make us dangerous, or at least not unacceptably so. Marco nodded, understanding the gravity of his role. What had begun as a simple cooking demonstration had somehow become a pivotal moment for humanity's place in the stars. He reviewed the modified recipes he'd prepared with Dr. Singh, dishes that showcased human culinary techniques while minimizing compounds harmful to the attending species. At 23:30 GST, the human delegation arrived at the small conference room designated for the hearing. The space had been specially prepared with separate atmospheric chambers for the methane-breathing Drask and the crystalline Zalthari, while still allowing visual contact between all parties. The Drask representative, Commander Grek, was an imposing figure even through the transparent barrier of his atmospheric chamber. Nearly 3 meters tall, with mottled green-gray skin and a ridge of sensory spines running from his skull down his back, he emanated an aura of barely restrained power. Ambassador Reeves, he rumbled, his translator converting the complex chemical language of the Drask into comprehensible speech. Your species has caused quite the disturbance. An unfortunate misunderstanding, Reeves replied diplomatically. We hope this session will provide valuable context. The Tellurian representative, a being of living sound waves who existed within a containment field that gave her a vaguely humanoid shape, vibrated with what might have been amusement. The young often make mistakes when joining new communities. The Tellurian Collective remembers our own adjustments. The Zalthari junior diplomat, introduced as Observer Lith, remained silent, its crystalline body refracting light in patterns that Dr. Singh had explained indicated cautious curiosity. We appreciate your willingness to listen, Reeves began, formally. What occurred today was not an attack or negligence, but a manifestation of fundamental biological and cultural differences between humans and many alliance species. You intentionally aerosolize toxic compounds as part of your energy consumption process, Commander Grek stated bluntly. This is not in dispute. What is in dispute is the intent and context. Professor Rodriguez stepped forward. Throughout human history, cooking, the application of heat and flavor compounds to food, has been central to our development as a species. It's not merely nutritional. It's a cornerstone of our social structures, our economies, and our identities. The holographic display activated, showing snippets of human history, ancient cooking fires surrounded by early humans, medieval feasts, modern restaurants, families gathered around dinner tables across cultures and centuries. Fascinating. The Tellurian representative's containment field shifted in what Dr. Singh had said indicated interest. Your species uses chemical... Exactly, Rodriguez confirmed. And the complexity of flavors, what other species perceive as irritants or toxins, represents thousands of years of cultural evolution. Commander Grek leaned forward, his sensory spines extending slightly. The Drask understand the value of chemical signatures in establishing identity and territory. Your cooking methods mark your presence in a manner we find conceptually familiar. Marco saw his opening and stepped forward. With your permission, I'd like to demonstrate a modified version of human cuisine specifically adapted for this meeting. All compounds have been analyzed by Dr. Singh to ensure they're within safe parameters for each species present. The Zalthari observer Lith finally spoke, its translated voice tinkling like crystal chimes. After today's events, you propose another demonstration? A controlled one, Marco assured them, with proper ventilation, barriers, and modified ingredients that showcase the concept without the harmful effects. After some debate, the representatives agreed, though with obvious caution. Marco activated a specially designed cooking surface that contained and filtered the aromatic compounds produced, allowing each species to experience only what their biology could safely process. For the Drask, he prepared a dish that emphasized the smoky complexity human cooking could achieve without the capsaicin that had caused such problems. For the Tellurian, whose species absorbed nutrients through sound vibrations, he created a sequence of cooking sounds, the sizzle of meat, the bubbling of sauces, that Dr. Singh had determined would resonate pleasurably with their unique biology. For the Zalthari, who could safely perceive but not physically interact with certain human cooking elements, he demonstrated the visual artistry of plating and presentation. As the demonstration progressed, something remarkable happened. Commander, Grek's sensory spines fully extended, a sign of intense interest among the Drask. The Tellurian's containment field vibrated with harmonics that Rodriguez whispered indicated pleasure. Even the cautious Zalthari observer drifted closer to the barrier separating them. Your species creates these experiences daily? Commander Grek asked, a new tone in his translated voice. Several times daily, across all human cultures, Marco confirmed. With countless variations developed over thousands of years. The Tellurian representative's field pulsed with bright colors. The collective finds this sensory communication method evocative. It speaks to primitive vibrations. Even our evolved forms recall. The Zalthari observer remained more reserved, but acknowledged, the visual compositions demonstrate mathematical principles of harmony our own art forms explore. There is unexpected sophistication in this primitive practice. As the demonstration concluded, Ambassador Reeves carefully guided the conversation toward the practical matter at hand, the pending classification of human cuisine as a biohazardous activity. We understand the need for safety protocols, she conceded. Humans are willing to adapt our practices in shared spaces, but complete restriction of our cultural heritage would be an unnecessary barrier to meaningful integration into the Alliance. Commander, Grek made a sound that the translator didn't immediately convert, a Drask expression that had no direct equivalent. The Drask marauders have observed that species which consume pain often excel in combat and territorial defense. We find value in such traits among our allies. The Tellurian representative vibrated in what seemed like agreement. The collective suggests that adaptation, not restriction, best serves diversity. Controlled environments for human cooking would address safety concerns while respecting cultural autonomy. Even the Zalthari observer, while not offering explicit support, noted that preliminary analysis suggests certain human flavor compounds may have applications in Zalthari crystal growth technologies, warranting further study rather than prohibition. As the hearing continued into the early hours, Marco exchanged a cautious glance with Ambassador Reeves. They hadn't achieved a complete diplomatic victory, but they had begun to shift the narrative, from humans as dangerous bioterrorists to humans as unusual but potentially valuable allies with unique perspectives to contribute to the galactic community. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The full emergency committee of the Galactic Alliance convened at precisely 08 GST. The chamber was arranged in concentric circles, with atmospheric sectors adjusted for the various biological needs of the 23 representatives present. In the center stood Ambassador Reeves, alone, but for a small holographic display terminal. The proceedings began with a formal reading of the incident report, its clinical language transforming Marco's cooking demonstration into what sounded like a deliberate attack. At 13:07 GST, the human delegate designated chef initiated a thermal chemical reaction that released multiple Class 3 restricted compounds into the shared atmosphere of Diplomatic Exhibition Hall C. Reeves waited patiently, knowing interruption would only hurt their case. The preliminary hearing with the Drask, Tellurian, and Zalthari representatives had yielded cautious support, but the full committee, particularly the Zephyri and Vikran, blocks, remained deeply skeptical of human intentions. Security Director Threll, representing the Zephyri, sat motionless throughout the reading, those 4 unblinking eyes fixed on Reeves. The Vecran representative pulsed with occasional ripples of what Dr. Singh had identified as anger or distress. When the report concluded, the committee chair, a gaseous being contained within an ornate floating sphere, addressed Reeves. Ambassador, your delegation has requested this hearing to present mitigating factors regarding Incident 572 Omega. You may proceed. Reeves activated her holographic display, which projected a 3-dimensional representation of human evolutionary history. Honorable representatives, I appear before you not to deny the effects of yesterday's incident, but to provide essential context that the Alliance must consider before rendering judgment. She guided the committee through a concise but compelling narrative. How cooking with fire had allowed early humans to extract more nutrients from food, enabling brain development. How spices were initially valued for their preservative properties in pre-technological societies. How shared meals became the cornerstone of human social and diplomatic interactions across millennia. What you perceived as a biological attack is, to humans, the most fundamental expression of cultural identity and community, she explained. When we prepare food for others, we are not merely providing nutrition, we are sharing our history, our values, and our trust. The committee received this presentation with varying reactions. Some representatives showed biometric indicators of interest, while others remained clearly skeptical. Director Threll eventually broke the silence. Ambassador Reeves presents. An eloquent justification, the Zephyri security director acknowledged. But the biological facts remain. Human cuisine, as demonstrated yesterday, produces compounds that are objectively harmful to multiple Alliance species. Cultural significance cannot override security protocols. The Vecran representative pulsed in agreement. The Alliance was founded on the principle of safe coexistence. How can that be maintained if humans routinely engage in activities that produce environmental toxins? Reeves had anticipated this argument. We propose a balanced approach. Designated cooking areas, with appropriate ventilation systems, chemical neutralizers for shared spaces, comprehensive labeling of all human food products. These measures would protect other species while respecting human cultural practices. The debate continued for nearly 2 hours, with representatives from various Alliance factions raising concerns and offering perspectives. The Tellurian representative spoke in favor of cultural accommodation, while the Drask commander Grek made a surprisingly strong statement about the value of species that embrace chemical challenge as a path to evolutionary advancement. Throughout the proceedings, the Alliance's contradiction became increasingly apparent. An interstellar society that prided itself on diversity, yet struggled to accommodate fundamental biological differences between member species. As the formal presentations concluded, the committee chair called for final statements before deliberation. Director Threll rose once more. The Zephyri consulate acknowledges the cultural significance of these practices to humans, he began, his tone measured. However, we cannot ignore the security implications. A species that has evolved to derive pleasure from compounds that cause pain in others represents a fundamental compatibility challenge for the Alliance. Reeves tensed, recognizing the subtle threat in Threll's words. Not just sanctions against human cooking, but questions about humanity's place in the Alliance altogether. Furthermore, Threll continued, the incident raises questions about the thoroughness of Earth's initial evaluation for Alliance membership. If such a fundamental biological incompatibility was overlooked, what other potential threats remain, undiscovered? As murmurs spread through the chamber, Ambassador Reeves recognized the critical moment had arrived. She stepped forward, her expression resolute. Director Threll raises an important point, she acknowledged, surprising many of the representatives. Biological diversity presents challenges, but I would remind this committee that the founding principle of the Alliance is not homogeneity, but adaptation. She activated a new holographic display, showing various Alliance species and their environmental requirements. The methane breathing. Drask cannot survive in oxygen atmospheres. The Tellurian collective communicates through sound frequencies that would shatter Zalthari crystalline forms. The Vikran biochemistry produces waste compounds toxic to 17 other member species. Reeves swept her gaze across the chamber. Yet we have built this alliance by adapting, creating segregated atmospheric zones, developing translation technologies, establishing waste processing protocols. We didn't demand that the Drask evolve to breathe oxygen or that Tellurians communicate only through visual means. The chamber had grown quiet, the representatives absorbing her words. Humans cook. It is integral to who we are. And yes, that process produces compounds harmful to some Alliance species. But rather than viewing this as a reason for exclusion, I propose we see it as an opportunity to once again demonstrate the Alliance's commitment to true diversity, not just of form, but of fundamental biological function. Director Threll's eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of intense thought among the Zephyri. You make a compelling philosophical argument, Ambassador, but practical concerns remain. The exhibition hall required complete decontamination. 7 delegates required medical intervention, which is why we propose these specific accommodations, Reeves countered, displaying a detailed plan developed overnight by the human delegation. Designated cooking facilities with molecular filtration systems, warning protocols for shared spaces, comprehensive chemical analysis for all human food products in Alliance facilities. The committee chair's containment sphere pulsed with deliberative lights. The committee will now adjourn to consider these matters. We will reconvene at 14:00 GST to announce our decision. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, Captain Hayes approached Reeves. Well argued, Ambassador. But will it be enough? She wondered aloud. Threll clearly sees this as an opportunity to question humanity's place in the Alliance altogether. Hayes nodded grimly. The Zephyri have always been uncomfortable with our rapid technological advancement. This gives them a pretext to recommend limitations on human activities throughout Alliance space. We need a more decisive demonstration, Reeves mused. Something that proves human cooking isn't just a hazard to be contained, but a potential asset to the Alliance. I might have an idea about that, Hayes replied, a calculating look in his eyes. But it's unorthodox, and we'll need Chef Santori's help. In a secured laboratory section of the human delegation's quarters, Marco worked alongside Dr. Singh and Professor Rodriguez with a sense of urgency. The modified cooking station they'd assembled was unlike anything he'd ever used. A hybridization of human culinary equipment and Alliance environmental control technology. Are you sure this will work? Marco asked as he carefully measured spices into the specialized compartments. The chemistry is sound, Dr. Singh assured him, though her expression betrayed some uncertainty. The Drask sensory system is remarkably adaptive. In controlled amounts, capsaicin and similar compounds should stimulate their chemoreceptors in ways they find interesting. Rodriguez adjusted the molecular filtration settings. According to our analysis of yesterday's hearing, the Drask representative showed clear indicators of positive response to the cooking aromas, even through his atmospheric barrier. Marco nodded, focusing on his preparations. What they were attempting was far more than a cooking demonstration. It was a proof of concept for how human cuisine might actually benefit certain Alliance species, rather than simply being a hazard. To be contained. Captain Hayes entered the laboratory, his expression tense. Ambassador Reeves has arranged a private meeting with Commander Grek before the committee reconvenes. We have 1 hour to make this work. The stakes couldn't be higher. If they could convince the Drask, one of the most militarily powerful and respected species in the Alliance, to openly support human cooking practices, it would be difficult for even the skeptical Zephyri and Vekran to push for severe restrictions. No pressure, Marco muttered as he began the careful cooking process, his experienced hands moving with precision despite the alien equipment. At 13 GST, Commander Grek arrived at the human delegation's laboratory, his massive frame nearly filling the specially reinforced doorway. The Drask warrior's atmospheric suit allowed him to breathe his native methane while moving through the oxygen-rich environment of the human section. "Ambassador," he rumbled in greeting, sensory spines already extending slightly in anticipation. "Your request for this private demonstration was unexpected, Commander Grek," Reeves replied with formal respect. "We believe we've discovered potential applications of human culinary compounds that may be of specific interest to the Drask marauders." Grek's reptilian features remained impassive, but his spines extended further, a clear sign of interest. "Proceed." Marco activated the specialized cooking system. Through a complex filtration and delivery process, specific aromatic compounds from the cooking food were isolated, concentrated, and channeled into the Drask's atmospheric suit in carefully controlled amounts. The reaction was immediate and startling. Commander Grek's entire spine ridge fully extended, vibrating slightly. His normally yellow eyes dilated to deep orange, and a low rumbling sound emanated from his massive chest. "This sensation," the Drask commander spoke, his translated voice deeper than before. "It resembles our sacred battle herbs, but with complexity our biochemistry cannot produce." Dr. Singh monitored the Drask's biometric readouts with fascination. The capsaicin compounds are stimulating neural pathways associated with heightened awareness in Drask physiology, similar to their natural combat-enhancing substances, but through different receptors. Marco continued the controlled cooking process, adjusting the balance of spices based on the Drask's reactions. "Different species experience these compounds in radically different ways," he explained. "What causes pain in some can produce pleasure or enhanced sensory perception in others." For nearly 30 minutes, the demonstration continued, with Marco preparing various combinations of human spices and cooking techniques, while Singh and Rodriguez carefully monitored their effects on the Drask commander. When the demonstration concluded, Grek remained silent for a long moment, his massive form perfectly still, except for the slowly retracting sensory spines. "The Drask marauders have long sought chemical enhancers for combat performance that do not dull the mind as our traditional battle herbs do," he finally said. "These human compounds, they sharpen rather than blur. This has significant potential." For our warrior caste, Ambassador Reeves stepped forward. "Commander, the committee will reconvene in 30 minutes to determine whether human cooking practices should be classified as a biohazardous activity and restricted throughout Alliance space." Grek's eyes narrowed slightly. "I understand your purpose in showing me this, Ambassador. You seek Drask support against the Zafari proposal." "We seek understanding," Reeves corrected diplomatically. "What some species experience as a toxin, yours apparently experiences as a potential benefit. This demonstrates exactly why blanket restrictions on human practices would be counter to the Alliance's principles of biological diversity." The Drask commander made a sound that the translator interpreted as something between a laugh and a growl. "You humans are more interesting than initial assessments suggested. The Zafari fear what they cannot categorize, and you resist easy categorization." "Will you speak on our behalf at the committee meeting?" Reeves asked directly. Grek's sensory spines flattened completely, a gesture of Drask decision-making. "I will speak truth as the Drask perceive it. Whether that benefits your position, we shall see." As the massive warrior departed, Hayes turned to Reeves. "Was that a yes or a no?" "With the Drask, it's never that simple," she replied. "But I think we've given him something to consider beyond the Zafari security concerns." Marco began shutting down the cooking equipment, his chef's hands moving automatically while his mind raced. "I never thought my cooking would become a diplomatic incident, let alone a potential alliance-building tool." "Cultural exchange often works in unexpected ways," Rodriguez observed. "Throughout human history, cuisine has been one of the most powerful vectors for cross-cultural understanding. Why should interspecies relations be any different?" At 14 Haus GST, the emergency committee reconvened. The atmosphere in the chamber seemed even more charged than before, with representatives clustered in small groups, engrossed in intense discussions that fell silent as Ambassador Reeves entered. She took her position in the center of the chamber, maintaining the calm, diplomatic demeanor that had served her throughout her career, despite the knowledge that the next few minutes might determine humanity's standing in the galactic community for generations to come. The committee chair's containment sphere glowed with formal opening patterns. This session will determine the Alliance response to Incident 572 Omega, classified as unauthorized release of biologically active compounds in a diplomatic zone. The committee has reviewed all evidence and testimony. Director Threll rose from the Zifari section. Before formal proceedings begin, the Zifari consulate wishes to modify its recommendation. A murmur spread through the chamber. This was highly unusual. The consulate maintains that human cooking practices represent a biological hazard requiring strict regulation, Threll continued, his four eyes blinking in that unsettling pattern. However, we withdraw our suggestion that this incident calls into question Earth's Alliance membership status. Reeves maintained her professional expression, but internally she felt a surge of relief. This was a significant concession from the Zifari, who had been pushing the hardest for severe consequences. The committee chair acknowledged Threll's statement. Does any representative wish to speak before we present our decision? To everyone's surprise, Commander Grek's massive form rose in the Drask section. The Drask Marauders wish to address the committee. The chamber fell silent. The Drask rarely participated in administrative proceedings, generally abstaining from votes on matters not directly related to security or territorial concerns. The incident in question has been framed as a hazard to be contained. Grek's powerful voice filled the chamber. The Drask perspective differs. We see potential value in human biochemical practices. He went on to describe, in the direct language typical of his species, how human cooking compounds interacted with Drask physiology in ways that could potentially enhance their combat capabilities and sensory acuity. The Alliance speaks constantly of diversity, Grek concluded, yet seeks to homogenize biological functions to the lowest common denominator of safety. The Drask have never accepted such limitations. We formally oppose any classification that would prevent further exploration of human culinary compounds and their potential applications for our species. The impact of this declaration was immediate and profound. The Drask were not merely suggesting tolerance of human practices, they were explicitly stating an interest in them. This transformed the narrative from containment of a hazard to facilitation of a potential collaboration between species. Other representatives began to speak, the debate shifting from whether to restrict human cooking to how to safely accommodate it while protecting vulnerable species. The Tellurian representative proposed designated culinary zones with appropriate atmospheric controls. The Zalthari, still cautious after their delegates' injuries, suggested mandatory chemical breakdowns for all human food products in shared spaces. Even the Vikran representative, while maintaining concerns about safety, acknowledged that complete restriction would contradict the Alliance's foundational principles of diverse coexistence. After nearly an hour of deliberation, the committee chair called for the final decision. The holographic display in the center of the chamber illuminated with the formal resolution. Regarding Incident 572 Omega, the Galactic Alliance hereby establishes the following protocols for human culinary practices in shared environments. Designation of specific zones with appropriate ventilation and containment systems for human cooking activities. Mandatory chemical analysis and warning labels for all human food products in Alliance facilities. Establishment of an interspecies culinary research initiative to explore both the hazards and potential benefits of human cuisine for various Alliance species. Cultural education programs to ensure all species understand the significance and limitations of human cooking practices. The resolution continued with technical specifications and implementation timelines, but the essential outcome was clear. Human cooking would not be classified as a biohazardous activity, but rather as a cultural practice requiring specific accommodations, similar to how the Alliance handled the bioluminescent communication spores of the Zalthari or the subsonic harmonics of Tellurian speech. As the session concluded, Ambassador Reeves found herself surrounded by representatives from various factions, many expressing interest in learning more about human cuisine and its potential applications. Even Director Threll approached, his expression unreadable as always. A favorable outcome for Earth, the Zephyri Security Director observed. Though I maintain my professional concern about a species that derives pleasure from compounds designed to cause pain. Reeves met his four-eyed gaze steadily. Perhaps that's precisely why humans have thrived, Director. We don't just endure challenges, we learn to enjoy them. Threll's skin rippled slightly. A concerning trait in potential adversaries, a valuable one in allies. He tilted his head in what might have been acknowledgement. The Zephyri will be watching Earth's integration into the Alliance with great interest. We would expect nothing less, Reeves replied diplomatically. 3 standard cycles later, Chef Marco Santori stood in the newly constructed human culinary embassy aboard the Galactic Alliance's central hub station. The state-of-the-art facility featured molecular filtration systems, segregated atmospheric zones, and the most advanced kitchen equipment Earth had to offer. Hard to believe all this started with some barbecue ribs, he remarked to Captain Hayes, who had been promoted to security director for the Human Diplomatic Corps after his handling of the 572 Omega incident. Hayes surveyed the bustling activity around them with satisfaction. From culinary terrorist to gastronomic ambassador. Not a bad career trajectory. The facility was preparing for the official opening ceremony of the first interspecies culinary exchange, an event that would have been unimaginable in the immediate aftermath of Marco's disastrous first demonstration. Dr. Singh approached, now the head of the Interspecies Culinary Research Initiative. The Drask delegation has arrived, she informed them. They're particularly interested in the capsaicin distillation process we've developed. And the Zalthari, Marco asked. Still cautious, but their scientists are fascinated by how certain cooking oils affect their crystalline growth patterns. They've established a research partnership with the University of Tokyo to explore applications in their architectural structures. Ambassador Reeves joined them, her formal diplomatic attire as impeccable as ever. The committee chair has confirmed attendance. Even Director Threll will be here. Marco raised an eyebrow. The Zephyri are actually willing to attend. A human cooking demonstration. From a safe distance, with triple-filtered atmospheric controls, Reeves confirmed with a small smile. But yes, what began as a security concern has evolved into a diplomatic opportunity. The Alliance has realized that biological differences don't have to be obstacles. They can be avenues for innovation. As they spoke, a group of veteran diplomats drifted past, their translucent bodies now equipped with specialized filters that allowed them to experience diluted versions of human cooking aromas without the harmful effects. Chef Santori, one acknowledged him with a respectful pulse. The Vecran Consulate has approved preliminary trials of the modified flavor compounds your team developed. Our sensory specialists are cautiously optimistic about the potential applications. Marco nodded, still amazed by how much had changed. What had begun as a catastrophic misunderstanding had evolved into a new field of interspecies collaboration. Human cuisine, once classified as a potential biohazard, was now being studied by xenobiologists, chemists, and cultural specialists throughout the Alliance. Hayes watched the preparations with a thoughtful expression. You know, there's an old human saying, the way to the heart is through the stomach. Turns out, that might be true across species lines. With appropriate filtration and environmental controls, Singh added wryly. As the time for the ceremony approached, Marco returned to his kitchen station. The menu he'd prepared represented collaboration rather than imposition. Human cooking techniques adapted to respect the biological differences of various Alliance species, while still maintaining the essence of what made Earth's cuisine unique. Ambassador. Reeves delivered the opening address to representatives from 27 Alliance species, each in their appropriate atmospheric enclosure. When humans first joined the Galactic Alliance, we understood we would face challenges of integration, she began. What we didn't anticipate was that something as fundamental as how we prepare food would become both our greatest obstacle and ultimately one of our most valuable contributions. She gestured toward the cooking stations where Marco and his team of human chefs waited. Today, we don't simply showcase human cuisine. We celebrate the Alliance's commitment to true diversity, not just in form or philosophy, but in the most basic biological functions that define us as living beings. As Marco began his demonstration, carefully with all safety protocols in place, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey from Incident 572 Omega to this moment of cultural exchange. Human cooking, once mistaken for biological warfare, had become a symbol of the complex adaptations required for truly diverse species to coexist. Commander Grek, now a regular visitor to the human culinary embassy, rumbled with approval as he experienced the carefully calibrated capsaicin blend designed for Drask physiology. Your species continues to surprise us, Chef Santori. What you call flavor, we have begun to incorporate into our combat training regimens. Our warriors report enhanced sensory acuity after exposure to your compounds. Even Director Threll, watching from behind multiple layers of protective barriers, seemed less suspicious than curious as he observed the proceedings with those 4 unblinking eyes. The Zifari still maintain that a species seeking pleasure in what others experience as pain represents a fundamental security concern, he noted to Ambassador Reeves. But we acknowledge the adaptability such traits demonstrate. High praise coming from you, Director, Reeves replied with diplomatic poise. Not praise. Observation. Threll's skin rippled slightly. The Alliance has existed for 12,000 standard cycles by establishing protocols for biological compatibility. Humans have forced us to reconsider whether compatibility is always necessary for coexistence. As the ceremony continued, with various species experiencing tailored versions of human cuisine through their respective environmental interfaces, Marco realized they had achieved something far more significant than merely defending Earth's culinary practices. They had demonstrated one of humanity's most fundamental traits, the ability to transform challenges into opportunities, to find value in difference rather than threat, to adapt without surrendering identity. What had begun as Incident 572 Omega, a diplomatic disaster that nearly derailed humanity's place in the galactic community, had evolved into something unexpected, a new model for interspecies relations that embraced biological diversity rather than merely accommodating it. As Marco presented the final course of the demonstration, specifically designed to create visual patterns that Zalthari crystalline forms could appreciate even if they couldn't consume the food itself, he caught Ambassador Reeves's eye across the chamber. She gave him a slight nod of acknowledgement, not just for the success of this event, but for the journey that had brought them here. From cooking to chemical warfare to cultural exchange in just 3 cycles. Only humans, perhaps, could navigate such a transformation with their core identity not just intact, but strengthened. The official records of the Galactic Alliance still listed Incident 572 Omega as a biological containment event, but its legacy had become something entirely different. Proof that even the most fundamental differences between species could become bridges rather than barriers, with the right adaptations, proper safety protocols, and a willingness to find value in diversity, and perhaps a dash of human spice to make things interesting.